There's this narrative in this broader context that hard news isn't doing well. And the New York Times is often held up as like the print of record for the US. But when you actually look at get deep into our ad spend data, they're also up 29% in terms of ad revenue. That's bananas in today's world. That 29% is also direct. This is like New York Times going out, hustling, selling their own stuff. This is, I'm going to the New York Times because I want to be in the New York Times.
You're listening to Media Monitor, where we break down what's happening in the media and the advertising industry and tell you what it actually means. Sean, welcome back.
Kelly, how are you?
This week, we had our company newsletter went out, and it featured a stat about the podcast and said that we are currently in the top 10, ranked number 9 in Apple's marketing podcast, which was super exciting.
Yeah.
And I love to see the growth of listeners, but it got me thinking, how do we get folks more engaged? Because we want feedback. We want comments. We want to hear from you.
It's the internet age.
Right?
We're like pseudo-influencers at this point.
We need that engagement.
Engagement is part of the stat. Yeah.
And so this week, we're going to go a little bit deeper into a topic, but we don't have a name for the segment yet. So we are hoping...
A little bit into the sausage making. Kelly and I probably spent a whole half-hour meeting debating what to call it and using all sorts of rhyming dictionaries to get us there, and no luck. So comments are very needed on this one.
And I told Sean that maybe it was like the Media Monitor microscope, and he told me that we would lose. He told me basically that I'm cooked.
Yeah, I'm just saying, we're very happy with our growth demo in the 24 to 30-year-old bracket. We're doing really well. Those numbers are climbing. I felt like maybe referencing a microscopic view or magnifying glass probably misses out that whole cohort. I'm not that age, so maybe they do use microscopes and magnifying glasses, but it felt like there was probably a more youthful take on this.
I think you're probably right. So we're going to put it out there. But what we're planning to do this week is go deeper into our own data and really unpack how companies make their money from advertising and, take it to a level deeper than what you can see if you're just doing your own research. And, I can't take any credit for this. This is really, Sean, as we were talking about the things that you're intrigued to read, you mentioned 10Ks.
I mean, who doesn't love curling up in a blanket? It's mid-December and you just want to crack open a 10K and just sit there next to a fire and start to finish, just read exactly how a company is doing. Get into their financials. Talk EBITDA. Who doesn't love that?
EBITDA.
EBITDA.
For those less familiar who aren't curling up
which is
to
a
the
shame.
Fire, high level, Sean, what's a 10K?
Yeah. So what's sort of cool about, cool publicly traded companies is they have to tell you how they're doing, right? It's part of why there's all this buzz around the IPOs coming from these AI companies, right? They have to reveal some level of financial detail. And so 10Ks are part of this requirement that in order to be publicly traded in a New York Stock Exchange or a NASDAQ or things like that, you got to kind of put up to this document. Most of it's pretty standardized across all companies. There's a few sections that you can kind of ad lib and go crazy with, but by and large, it's pretty static. Everybody kind of reports the same thing. There's a certain requirement as to the types of financials, how you're actually accounting for that, right? You can't just make up your own math and say this is revenue, right? It has to be certainly defined. And that's then kind of out there for anyone to read. So you can kind of actually get into the business and understand what's going on, which is interesting, right? The problem that I've always had is in advertising, 90% of companies, if they even tell you what they're making in ad revenue, it's usually just a line that says advertising. And in many places, it doesn't tell you if that's US, international, European, right? It just says this generic line and doesn't really offer a lot of detail. And so that's why I thought, hey, we have a lot of detail. What if we did one of these micro segments target, a smaller amount of time that we're doing the pod just to see if folks like it. And if so, we can kind of add these into the rotation along with our grab bags, our morsels, our longer, like long form episodes, right? Like mix up the content to keep your feed interesting in terms of podcasts and also just give us some ability to modulate the effort, right? Like this isn't even a part-time job. This is like a part-time job for us. And so like trying to manage that with like our regular duties, we want to kind of like also figure out the types of content we can deliver that's interesting. So that was where we landed on this microscope, magnifying
Yeah,
glass.
magnifying glass, microscope. You guys tell us. And so,
Please.
and then, I mean, also for those who don't know that, you know, what we sell is this data, right? Amongst other parts of our business. This is why companies come to us is they want that double click in on ad spend, pricing data. They want to get into the nitty-gritty. And so what we thought we'd do is we would look at a company and just talk a little bit about, what's growing, where they're seeing some, successes. We'll get into the segments that, the placement types and how, we can drill down into those components and give you a window into what could just be a single line item advertising, all that's underneath that hood. Because, it's super interesting as you're thinking about if you're a competitor in the space, where you want to be investing or divesting. So without, too much more intro, let's dive into it and talk. We're going to talk New York Times.
Great lady.
The Gray Lady.
Great lady.
So we pulled up their stats and we were looking at what were some of the drivers. And Sean, you called out a few pretty interesting things. So talk to us about what you saw.
Well, yeah. So overall, right, there's this narrative in this broader context that hard news isn't doing well. We're seeing some of that narrative and kind of how post, Peace Guy, CBS is kind of going through a bunch of changes in terms of how they want to go to market, all these things, right? And the narrative has been like hard news doesn't sell, it's not interesting. And the New York Times is often held up as like the print of record for the US, right? In terms of like the be all end all when it comes to hard news. And what's interesting is that both their 10K has shown growth, subscriber growth, all of these things. But
Mm-hmm.
when you actually look at like get deep into our ad spend data, they're also up. We're looking at 25 versus 24. They're up 29% in terms of ad revenue.
Yeah.
Like that's bananas in today's world. And we talked about this before, right? There's no midterms. There's no like one-off sporting event that maybe would have benefited viewership or readership on the Athletic, right? None of that. This was just like a classic, just a regular old year out there and still up 29%, which is like good for them, right? Now, there's not many players in the space that can kind of say the same thing around advertising, which I thought was super interesting.
Yeah.
Also, I was just gonna say that 29% is also direct, right? Because often it's like, oh, well, it must be programmatic and it must be because like they just allowed display to be sold programmatically. And there is some of that, but we're also talking like the data here, a lot of this is direct sold. This is like New York Times going out, hustling, selling their own stuff. So this isn't just like I'm buying a generic news demo and I'm finding them wherever they're reading. This is I'm going to the New York Times because I want to be in the New York Times.
Exactly. And, I can think without like looking at the data, I can think of a lot of what I would consider pretty smart plays that they've made over the last few years. Post COVID, like games, right? Like we're all talking about
Huge.
the Wordle. That's a
Yep.
big piece of it. Drilling, like going deep into podcasts and figuring out how to make that part of the fabric of your life. I mean, for one, I listen to the Daily every single day. And then, from a subscription perspective, I think hitting that family plan to expand readership, listenership is a way to grow ads, right? The more
Yeah.
eyeballs you have, the more ads you can sell to them. So they're kind of like doing a lot of different things all the same time. And, thematic with some of our other episodes is embracing the power of sports, right? What did
Right.
you see in that area?
Yeah. So I'll work backwards from your first point around podcasts because I think that's an interesting one. So one, in 2025, they made about $16 million on advertising for podcasts, which is great, right? Now, it's not the 29% growth that they're seeing across the board, but what is interesting is what has been explosive for them is the actual sponsorship. So, like host
Hmm.
read copy or actual sponsorship injected into the pods is growing literally triple digits compared to just your kind of, I guess, technically more like a spot and dot within the podcast. And so it's this massive growth engine on the pod side. And it makes sense, right? Like they've invested, they have a lot of hard hitting talent that have been podcasting for years
Hmm.
that kind of draws in listeners and kind of follows them almost like a mini cult of personality, being like, yeah, I need to hear more from these folks. And they're doing really well, right? That's what's driving a lot of their podcast is getting those folks to also then do that host read copy. Yeah. So they're up, pretty substantially, 16 million of their overall revenue came from podcasts in 2025. So pretty solid. And then on the athletic side, the sports side, right? They kind of like sort of branded their sports section. They went all in. They've got video now. That's another area that has seen tremendous growth. Like if you look at 2025, for example, it's roughly like 34 million, 33 million just
Hmm.
on sports related content alone, which is all, collectively up like 75%, 80%,
Yeah.
which is just massive. And again, like part of that is they changed their strategy, they invested, but just explosive in terms of like what they're seeing from an advertising perspective.
And like you said, it wasn't a World Cup year. It
No,
wasn't a
no, like
year where
no
we
sports
have
thing. Yeah.
it wasn't a year when knock wood and when this podcast airs, we're gonna know the result. But I hope the result is that the Knicks take the championship after
Well,
last night's
obviously.
game. After last night's game, oh man, I wish I was in New York City right now. It's
I
probably just
looked up the
electric.
stats just to prepare for this meeting. Actually, you know what? It was the Athletic push notification to my phone telling me that they came back big in the last quarter, came back for the largest gap I think ever in the NBA finals to kind of make a comeback. Only no reason I know that is the Athletic. So,
There you
shout
go.
out New York Times. Didn't even mean to make that connection, but here we are.
Here we are. So, okay, podcast, sports, that's absolutely driving the growth. Anything else that's kind of standing out for you?
Yeah. So the one thing that like legitimately surprised me, which like I don't know if it should or shouldn't, is print. Print is not dead.
Print.
Print, their ad revenue for print grew 9%. So
That's
like
that's actually
that
shocking to me.
out of
I can't
all
wrap
of
my head
those,
around it.
yeah, actually like out of everything I read in here, that was like the single stat that genuinely surprised me. Cause like you look at our data on print and like real print, not just like, oh, this is a newspaper making stuff. No, I'm talking like legitimately broadsheet, ink on your hands after reading it for half an hour type print, universally across our data down, right?
Yeah.
Every country we look at, all like mid single digit declines. New York Times up 9%, which again is not the robust engine that is the 29, but the fact that it's print and they're still cranking out money on it is just to me mind boggling. Like good for them. And it's not nothing. It was 36 million bucks in 2025, which again is like pretty
Yeah.
substantial and growing. You're like, all right, clearly you're doing
Yeah.
something right.
That's mind-boggling. Well,
I
so I
know.
mean, I think I think all of this makes a lot of sense and it's nice to see a company investing in the right places, making the right decisions,
Definitely some good bets
and
that paid off.
exactly. And so, I'd be curious for feedback. What do people give us ideas? What would you like to see to help them grow even more? What's missing for you in your New York Times subscription if you have one? And what did you think about this episode where we dove into a particular company and that advertising line item? And then of course, what should we call this thing? Like,
Yeah,
I don't think it's magnifying glass
it
or
might not be.
microscope. I'm pretty sure it's not.
I could be
But
wrong. I don't
but
have a good pulse on the kids these days.
we need the feedback. So
Yeah.
I mean, and that's where we'll leave it.
Yeah. The one thing I will throw is questions because you were on a good roll with questions. Is I would also say, if you do like this segment, what companies do you want us to break down in the future? Because you and I went back and forth how many times on trying to figure out the right company that was like an interesting mix of stuff. Not that we want to like mock, the social media companies of the world, but like Meta makes their money from Meta stuff. So it's like we can always break down like Instagram, carousels, video, etc. But like It's not as, say, robust as some other companies in terms of like complexity. So it'd be great to know what people want us to dig into if they do like this segment as well.
All right. Well, we hope to hear from you. Get those comments coming, and we will see you next week.
Absolutely. Have a good one, Kelly.
Thanks, Sean. Bye.
That's Media Monitor. Follow us and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts every Wednesday for a new episode. And as always, thanks for listening.